mare's labored breathing cut through the Kansas night like a prayer whispered too late, and Penelope Lawson had been kneeling beside the suffering animal for nearly 12 hours without moving from her vigil. Her cotton dress clung to her legs, soaked through with sweat and the mare's blood, while her fingers never stopped their gentle work of pressing clean cloths against the gaping wound on the horse's flank, where barbed wire had torn through flesh and muscle during the afternoon stampede. Ellsworth had grown quiet after midnight, the saloons finally emptying their drunken patrons onto the dusty streets before settling into an uneasy silence that felt more dangerous than comforting in the summer of 1874. Penelope had heard stories about what happened to women alone after dark, especially women like her who had no husband or father to claim protection over them, but she could not abandon this mare. The animal belonged to the widow Henderson, who relied on her horses for the wagon freight business that kept her 3 children fed, and losing this breeding mare would mean losing everything they had worked towards since the war had taken Mr. Henderson 6 years prior. The lantern beside Penelope flickered as oil ran low, casting dancing shadows across the stable yard behind the freight office. She reached for the spare can with trembling fingers, her arms aching from holding pressure on the wound for so many hours. The mare whinnied softly, a sound of pain that made Penelope's chest tighten with sympathy and determination. She had delivered calves and foals since she was 14 years old, learning the work from her father before consumption took him when she was 17. At 22 now, she knew animals better than she knew people, understood their suffering in ways that made her heart break and rebuild itself over and over again. Bootsteps crunched on gravel behind her, and Penelope's spine went rigid with fear. Her hand moved instinctively toward the rifle she had leaned against the stable wall, but before she could reach it, a man's voice cut through the darkness with surprising gentleness. "Easy now. I am not here to cause trouble." Penelope turned her head just enough to see him in the lantern light. He stood about 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, wearing dust-covered denim and a hat pulled low over his face. A revolver hung at his hip, but his hands were raised slightly, palms forward in a gesture of peace. The starlight caught the edge of his jaw, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, but young enough that she guessed he could not be much older than 30. "This is private property," Penelope said, keeping her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "The freight office does not do business at this hour." "I am not looking for business." The man stepped closer, and the lantern light revealed more of his features. Dark hair curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat, and his eyes held a striking pale blue color that seemed almost silver in the dim light. "I saw your lamp burning from the boarding house window across the street. Been watching it for hours, wondering what kind of person stays awake all night in a stable yard." "The kind who values a life," Penelope said sharply. "Now state your purpose or move along. I have no time for conversation." Instead of leaving, the man lowered himself to a crouch a few feet away, studying the mare with an practiced eye that told Penelope he knew horses. His gaze traced the wound, the bloodied cloths, the way Penelope kept constant pressure with her left hand while her right hand stroked the mare's neck in soothing patterns. "Wire cut?" he asked. "Barbed wire. The stampede this afternoon pushed her through the new fencing by the stockyards. The wound is deep, but I do not think it hit any major vessels. She has lost blood, but not enough to kill her if I can keep infection away and get the bleeding fully stopped." The man nodded slowly. "You know your work." "I know animals," Penelope corrected. "People are generally less trustworthy." A ghost of a smile crossed the man's face. "Cannot argue with that assessment." He shifted his weight, settling into a more comfortable position. "Name is Quincy Crawford. I am a horsebreaker by trade. Just came into Ellsworth 2 days ago looking for work. Been breaking Mustangs for the Army down in Texas, but I wanted to see what opportunities Kansas might offer." Penelope studied him warily, unsure what to make of this stranger who introduced himself so readily. In her experience, men who approached women alone at night wanted things that were not freely offered. But Quincy Crawford kept his distance, his posture relaxed but not threatening, His attention focused more on the mare than on Penelope herself. "Penelope Lawson," she finally offered. "I work for the widow Henderson, managing her freight horses. This mare is one of her breeding stock." "Valuable animal, then." "Worth more than money to Mrs. Henderson. This mare's foals bring in enough income to keep her children clothed and fed." Quincy nodded his understanding. His eyes tracked to the dark circles under Penelope's eyes, the way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, even as her hands continued their steady work. "How long have you been out here?" "Since 3 in the afternoon. I found her trying to jump the fence where the wire caught her. Took me an hour to calm her enough to examine the damage. That makes it near about 1 in the morning now." Quincy's voice carried concern. "You have been holding pressure for 10 hours?" "Closer to 12 if you count the time it took to get her here from the stockyards. You are going to collapse. The mare needs constant attention." Quincy was quiet for a long moment, and Penelope thought perhaps he would leave after all. Instead, he stood and walked to the water pump at the edge of the yard, working the handle until clear water gushed into the trough. He pulled a clean bandana from his pocket, soaked it thoroughly, and returned to crouch beside Penelope. "Here," he said, offering the wet cloth. "At least cool your face. You look like you're about to pass out from heat exhaustion." Penelope wanted to refuse, but her head was swimming and her mouth felt full of cotton. She accepted the bandana with her free hand and pressed it against her forehead, the cool water bringing instant relief that made her realize how dangerously overheated she had become. "Thank you," she said quietly. Quincy settled back onto his heels, studying the mare again. "I have treated wire cuts before. Nasty business, but this one looks clean enough. You did good work keeping her calm and getting the bleeding controlled. She is not out of danger yet. Infection could still kill her, or she could tear the wound open if she gets spooked. That is why you are staying with her." "That is why I am staying with her," Penelope confirmed. Quincy looked at her directly then, and Penelope felt the weight of his gaze like something physical. His eyes held intelligence, and something else she could not quite name. A kind of understanding that seemed unusual in a drifting cowboy. "You cannot stay awake forever, Miss Lawson." "I can stay awake as long as necessary. I do not doubt your determination, but determination does not change the limits of the human body." Quincy stood again, dusting off his pants. "I will take the next watch." Penelope blinked up at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Go get some rest. I will watch the mare. Keep pressure on the wound. Make sure she stays calm. Come back in a few hours when you have slept." "I cannot possibly leave her with a stranger." "You can and you will, because if you do not get some sleep, you will pass out and be no good to this animal or anyone else." Quincy's voice was firm but not unkind. "I know you have no reason to trust me. I am just some cowboy who wandered up out of the darkness, but I give you my word that I will care for this mare like she was my own. I will not leave her side, and I will come get you immediately if her condition changes." Penelope searched his face, looking for signs of deception or ill intent. She found none, but that did not necessarily mean anything. "Why would you do this? You do not know me or Mrs. Henderson. This mare means nothing to you." "The mare means something to you," Quincy said simply, "and you have been out here alone for 12 hours trying to save her life. That tells me you are someone worth helping." He crouched down again, meeting her eyes at the same level. "Besides, I meant what I said. I am a horse breaker. I know how to care for injured animals. This mare will be in good hands." Every instinct Penelope had developed over years of living alone in a hard world screamed at her not to trust this man, but her body was betraying her, swaying with exhaustion, her vision blurring at the edges. The mare needed someone alert and capable, not someone about to collapse from fatigue. And there was something in Quincy Crawford's steady gaze that made her want to believe him, dangerous as that impulse might be. "If anything happens to her," Penelope started. "Nothing will happen to her," Quincy interrupted gently. "You have my word." Penelope looked down at the mare, whose breathing had steadied somewhat over the past hour. The bleeding had slowed to a seep, and the animal's eyes were calmer than they had been. Perhaps she could rest for just a few hours. She could sleep in the tack room, close enough to hear if anything went wrong. 3 hours, Penelope said firmly. I will rest for 3 hours, and then I am coming back. Fair enough. Penelope carefully transferred the pressure on the wound to Quincy's larger hands, showing him exactly how much pressure to maintain and where to keep his fingers to control any fresh bleeding. Quincy followed her instructions with focused attention, his touch on the mare gentle but confident. The animal nickered softly but did not try to pull away, which Penelope took as a good sign. Talk to her, Penelope said as she struggled to her feet, her legs cramping after so many hours in a kneeling position. Keep your voice low and steady. If she starts to panic, do not try to force her calm. Just keep talking until she settles. I understand. Penelope collected her rifle and the nearly empty lantern, casting one last look at Quincy and the mare before forcing herself to walk toward the tack room. Her entire body ached, her dress was ruined beyond saving, and her hands were stained dark with blood. But the mare was alive, and somehow she had found help in the most unexpected form. The tack room smelled of leather and horse sweat, familiar scents that eased some of Penelope's anxiety as she spread a saddle blanket on the floor and lay down. She told herself she would sleep lightly, ready to wake at the slightest sound of distress, but exhaustion claimed her within minutes, dragging her down into darkness deeper than any she had known. When Penelope woke, sunlight was streaming through the cracks in the tack room walls, and the sounds of morning activity filled the stable yard. She jerked upright in panic, realizing she had slept far longer than 3 hours. Her body protested every movement as she scrambled to her feet and rushed outside, terrified of what she might find. The mare was standing. Not just standing, but drinking from a bucket of fresh water while Quincy stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her neck. The wound on her flank was newly bandaged with clean white cloth, and the animal looked alert and relatively comfortable despite her injury. Quincy turned as Penelope emerged from the tack room, and she saw that he looked as exhausted as she had felt the night before. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his jaw was rough with stubble, but he smiled when he saw her. She's going to be fine, he said. Got her standing about an hour ago. She's drinking well, and the wound looks clean. No signs of infection yet. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, a combination of relief and exhaustion and something else she could not name. You stayed with her all night. I said I would. I slept longer than 3 hours. You needed it. Quincy's voice was gentle. No point in waking you when the mare was stable and you were clearly done in. Penelope walked closer, running her hands over the mare's neck and shoulder, checking her temperature and the quality of her breathing. Everything Quincy had said was true. The mare was weak but stable, and the crisis had passed. He had done exactly what he promised. I do not know how to thank you, Penelope said quietly. No thanks necessary. I was glad to help. Quincy yawned, covering his mouth with the back of his hand. Though I will confess I could use some sleep myself now. Of course. You must be exhausted. Penelope felt a strange reluctance to see him leave, which made no sense given that she had known him less than 12 hours. The boarding house across the street has rooms? That is where I'm staying. Room 4, top of the stairs. Quincy gave the mare one final pat before stepping back. If you need anything, if her condition changes, come get me. Do not hesitate. I will not. Quincy touched the brim of his hat in farewell and turned to leave, his gait slightly unsteady with fatigue. Penelope watched him cross the stable yard and disappear into the street beyond, feeling oddly bereft now that he was gone. She told herself she was being foolish, that Quincy Crawford was just a decent man who had done a kind thing, but some part of her already missed his calm presence and steady hands. The day passed in a blur of activity as Penelope tended to the mare and managed the other horses in Mrs. Henderson's care. The widow herself came by mid-morning, her face creased with worry until she saw the mare standing and taking feed from Penelope's hand. Oh, thank the Lord, Mrs. Henderson breathed, clasping her hands together. I heard about the stampede, Saw the fence damage. I was so afraid we had lost her." "She is not completely out of danger yet," Penelope cautioned, "but I think she will recover with proper care." Mrs. Henderson's eyes took in Penelope's exhausted state, the blood-stained dress, the shadows under her eyes. "You stayed with her all night, did you not?" "I did what needed to be done." "You are a blessing, Penelope. I do not know what I would do without you." Mrs. Henderson reached into her pocket and pulled out several coins. "This is extra for your extraordinary efforts." Penelope wanted to refuse, but she knew better than to turn down money when she had so little. "Thank you, madam. Though I should tell you I had help. A man named Quincy Crawford watched over the mare for several hours while I rested. He is a horsebreaker, new to Ellsworth." "Crawford?" Mrs. Henderson frowned thoughtfully. "I have not heard the name, but I will make inquiries. If he helped save my mare, I owe him thanks as well." The next 2 days fell into a pattern. Penelope cared for the mare during daylight hours, cleaning and rebandaging the wound, coaxing the animal to eat and drink, monitoring for any signs of fever or infection. At night, Quincy would appear as darkness fell, taking over the watch so Penelope could rest. They spoke little during these exchanges, but Penelope found herself looking forward to the moment when he would walk across the yard, his familiar silhouette backlit by the last rays of sunset. On the third evening, Penelope broke the pattern by bringing 2 plates of food from the boarding house dining room. She found Quincy sitting on an overturned bucket beside the mare, humming a low tune that seemed to calm the animal. "I thought you might be hungry," Penelope said, offering one of the plates. Quincy's face lit with genuine pleasure. "That is very kind. I confess I have been living on hardtack and jerky the past few days." They ate in comfortable silence, the mare dozing between them, her breathing deep and even. The wound was healing well, showing no signs of infection, and Penelope felt confident now that the animal would make a full recovery. "You have been staying with her every night," Penelope said after a while. "I thought perhaps after the first night you might decide you had done enough." "I said I would help, so I am helping." Quincy set his empty plate aside. "Besides, I like the company. The mare is a good listener." Penelope found herself smiling. "Better than most people." "Far better than most people." Quincy leaned back against the stable wall, his long legs stretched out before him. "Though present company is not bad either." Heat rose in Penelope's cheeks, and she was grateful for the dim light that hid her blush. "You are easy to talk to. Most men I meet want to tell me what I should be doing or how I should be living. Seems to me you're doing just fine on your own." "That is a rare opinion for a man to hold." "Maybe I'm not like most men." Penelope studied him in the lamplight, taking in the weathered lines of his face, the calluses on his hands, the quiet confidence in his posture. "No," she said softly. "I do not think you are." Something shifted between them in that moment, an awareness that had been building over the past 3 nights suddenly coming into focus. Quincy held her gaze, and Penelope saw her own feelings reflected back at her, interest and attraction, and the beginnings of something deeper that frightened her as much as it thrilled her. "Tell me about yourself," Penelope said, needing to fill the charged silence with words. "You said you were breaking Mustangs in Texas. What brought you to Kansas?" Quincy was quiet for a moment, as if weighing how much to share. "I grew up on a ranch in Missouri, youngest of 5 boys. My father raised cattle and horses, taught all of us the trade, but after the war, things got hard. Land was expensive, competition fierce. My brothers stayed to work the family ranch, but I wanted to make my own way." "So you left." "I left. Worked my way south. Learned to break wild horses from an old Mexican vaquero who knew more about horsemanship than any man I've ever met. Spent 3 years in Texas, saving money and building a reputation. But Texas is getting crowded too, and I heard Kansas was opening up, new towns springing up along the railroad. Figured I would come see what opportunities might be here." "And have you found opportunities?" "I found something," Quincy said, his eyes never leaving hers. Not sure yet if it is what I came looking for, but it feels important." Penelope's heart was beating too fast, her palms damp with nervous sweat. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she was afraid of the answer, afraid of the feelings rising in her chest like floodwater after a storm. "What about you?" Quincy asked. "How does a woman as skilled with animals as you are end up working alone in a rough town like Ellsworth?" Penelope looked down at her hands, at the scars and calluses that marked years of hard work. "My father was a veterinarian, or as close as we had to one in our county. He delivered foals and calves, treated sick animals, taught me everything he knew. When he died, I tried to continue his work, but people did not want to hire a woman for that kind of labor. I drifted for a while, taking whatever jobs I could find. Came to Ellsworth 6 months ago and found work with Mrs. Henderson. She did not care that I was a woman, only that I knew horses." "Your father taught you well." "He taught me to value all life, human and animal, to see suffering and do what I could to ease it." Penelope's voice grew thick with emotion. "I miss him every day. I am sorry for your loss." The simple sincerity in Quincy's voice made Penelope's throat tighten. She blinked back tears, embarrassed by her sudden vulnerability. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of night settling over Ellsworth. The mare shifted her weight, and Quincy automatically reached out to check the bandage, his movements practiced and gentle. Penelope watched his hands move over the animal's flank and felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. "You should rest," Quincy said eventually. "I have this watch." Penelope nodded and stood, but she found herself reluctant to leave. "Quincy?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you were here. I'm glad you offered to help." Quincy's smile was warm enough to chase away the night's chill. "So am I, Penelope. So am I." The following weeks brought changes to Ellsworth and to Penelope's carefully ordered life. The mare recovered fully, returning to the pasture with only an impressive scar to show for her ordeal. Mrs. Henderson, true to her word, sought out Quincy to thank him personally and ended up hiring him to break several young horses she had acquired for the freight business. This meant Quincy was around the stable yard most days, his presence becoming as familiar and necessary as the sunrise. Penelope told herself she was not falling for him, that the warmth she felt when he smiled at her across the corral was just friendship, that the way her heart raced when his hand brushed hers as they worked together meant nothing significant. But she was lying to herself, and she knew it. Quincy Crawford had worked his way into her life and her heart with the same patient gentleness he used on wild horses, and Penelope was terrified of what that meant. She had built her independence carefully, learning to rely on no one but herself, and the thought of needing someone, of trusting someone with her heart, felt more dangerous than facing down a charging bull. One afternoon in late July, Penelope was working in the corral with a temperamental gelding when she felt eyes on her. She turned to find Quincy leaning against the fence, watching her with an expression of undisguised admiration. "You have a gift," he said. "That horse would have thrown anyone else 10 times by now." "He is just scared," Penelope said, stroking the gelding's neck. "Someone treated him rough, and now he does not trust. But trust can be rebuilt with patience." "Is that what you believe? That trust can be rebuilt?" Penelope heard the real question beneath his words. "I want to believe it." Quincy climbed over the fence and approached slowly, letting the gelding see him coming. The horse snorted and shifted, but did not bolt, which Penelope took as progress. Quincy stopped a few feet away, his attention focused on her rather than the animal. "Penelope, I need to say something, and I would appreciate it if you would let me get through it before you respond." Her stomach clenched with anxiety. "All right. I came to Ellsworth looking for work and a fresh start. I did not come looking for anything else. Did not expect to find anything else. But then I saw your lamp burning that night, and I found you fighting to save a dying animal with nothing but determination and heart. And these past weeks working alongside you, watching you with the horses, talking with you in the evenings, I have come to care for you deeply." Penelope's breath caught in her chest. She wanted to speak, but Quincy held up a hand. I know you value your independence. I know you have built a life here on your own terms, and I respect that more than I can say. I am not asking you to give up anything you have built, but I am asking if maybe there might be room in your life for me, for us. The gelding beside them whinnied softly, and Penelope realized her hands were trembling. Quincy, If you do not feel the same way, just tell me, Quincy continued, his voice rough with emotion. I will still work here, still be your friend if you will have me as that. But I needed you to know how I feel. Hiding it was making me crazy. Penelope looked at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who had stayed up all night with an injured mare just because it mattered to her, who made her laugh and feel safe and challenged her to imagine a life bigger than the one she had been surviving in. And she realized that somewhere along the way, fear had become less important than hope. I feel the same way, she said quietly. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was foolish, but I cannot help it. When you are near, everything feels easier. When you are gone, I find myself watching for you. The joy that lit Quincy's face was beautiful enough to steal her remaining breath. He closed the distance between them slowly enough that she could have stepped back if she wanted to, but Penelope did not want to step back. She wanted to step forward into his arms, into his life, into the possibility of something she had never let herself dream about. When Quincy kissed her, gentle and questioning, Penelope kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she had been denying for weeks. The gelding snorted and moved away, unimpressed by human drama, but Penelope barely noticed. She was lost in the sensation of Quincy's arms around her, his lips on hers, the solid warmth of his body against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that for so long. You should have done it sooner. His laugh was breathless and happy. I will keep that in mind for the future. They stood together in the corral, holding each other as the afternoon sun blazed overhead and the horses moved around them in lazy circles. Penelope felt something unfurl in her chest, something that had been locked tight for years finally opening to the light. Trust, she realized. This was what it felt like to trust someone, to let down the walls and let someone in. What happens now? She asked. Now we figure it out together, Quincy said simply. No rush, no pressure, just you and me taking it one day at a time. I like the sound of that. So do I. The rest of the summer passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Quincy and Penelope became a fixture around Ellsworth, the horsebreaker and the horse doctor, as some of the locals called them. They worked side by side in the corrals, rode out together to check on Mrs. Henderson's horses in the pastures, spent evenings sitting on the porch of the boarding house talking about everything and nothing. Quincy was a patient suitor, never pushing Penelope faster than she was ready to go, but his intentions were clear. He wanted a life with her, a real partnership built on mutual respect and love. And slowly, carefully, Penelope let herself want the same thing. In September, Quincy asked her to marry him. They were out riding, checking fence lines in the pastures west of town, when he pulled his horse to a stop on a rise overlooking the prairie. The grassland stretched out before them like an ocean, golden in the late afternoon light. And Penelope felt a swell of love for this land and the man beside her. Penelope Lawson, Quincy said, his voice serious but his eyes warm. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you never give up on anything you care about. I want to build a life with you, raise horses together, maybe raise a family, if that is something you want. Will you marry me? Penelope looked at him, at this man who had proven himself over and over again, who had earned her trust and her heart. Yes, she said, the word feeling like freedom rather than surrender. Yes, I will marry you. Quincy whooped with joy and urged his horse closer so he could pull her into a kiss that made her laugh against his mouth. They stayed on that rise until the sun began to set, making plans and dreaming about the future. two people who had found each other against all odds in the wild Kansas prairie. They were married in October in a simple ceremony at the Ellsworth Church with Mrs. Henderson and her children as witnesses. Penelope wore a dress of pale blue cotton that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and Quincy wore his best suit, looking both nervous and radiantly happy. The preacher kept the ceremony short, and when Quincy kissed his bride, the small congregation erupted in applause. Mrs. Henderson hosted a modest celebration at her home, and Penelope found herself surrounded by more goodwill than she had experienced since her father's death. It felt strange and wonderful to be part of a community again, to have people who cared about her happiness. But the best part of the day was when she and Quincy finally left the celebration and rode out to the small house they had rented on the edge of town. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a well, but it was theirs, their home, their fresh start, their future. That night, as Penelope lay in her husband's arms, she thought about the injured mare and the lamp burning in the darkness and the stranger who had offered to take the next watch. She thought about how much her life had changed since that exhausting, terrifying night, how one moment of vulnerability had led to all of this joy. "What are you thinking about?" Quincy murmured, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "About how lucky I am," Penelope said honestly. "About how grateful I am that you saw my lamp that night." "I am the lucky one. I found you when I was not even looking, and you turned out to be everything I did not know I needed." Penelope tilted her head to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "We found each other," she corrected, "and I think we are both exactly where we are supposed to be." As winter settled over Kansas, Quincy and Penelope worked to establish their own business. They combined their skills, Quincy breaking horses while Penelope provided medical care and training. Word spread quickly about the quality of their work, and soon they had more clients than they could handle. Ranchers came from counties away to have Quincy break their wild horses, and farmers brought injured animals to Penelope with confidence that she could heal them. The work was hard, the hours long, but they thrived on it. More than that, they thrived together. Quincy proved to be an equal partner in every sense, consulting Penelope on business decisions, dividing household chores fairly, supporting her dreams with the same energy he brought to his own. And Penelope discovered that being married did not mean losing herself, but rather finding new dimensions of herself reflected in Quincy's love. Their first real test came in January when a blizzard swept across the plains, dumping 3 feet of snow in a single night. They woke to find their small barn buried, the horses trapped inside without food or water. Quincy wanted to go alone, to spare Penelope the brutal cold, but she refused. "We are partners," she said firmly, wrapping a scarf around her face. "That means we face trouble together." They spent 6 hours digging through the snow, their fingers numb and faces raw with cold, but they freed the horses and got them fed. Later, huddled together by the fire, Quincy pulled Penelope close and whispered, "You are the strongest person I have ever known." "I learned from the best," Penelope replied, thinking of her father and his lessons about perseverance. By spring, their business had grown enough that they were able to purchase land, 20 acres with a good creek running through it and enough grazing for a decent herd. They worked together to build a proper barn, to string fence, to create something lasting and real. And through it all, their love deepened, becoming as much a part of the landscape as the prairie grass and the endless Kansas sky. In May, Penelope realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions, joy, and fear tangled together so tightly she could not separate them. She had always wanted children, but had never imagined it would actually happen, had trained herself not to hope for things that seemed impossible. When she told Quincy, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "You and me, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Quincy said, setting her down gently and cupping her face in his hands. "You have given me everything, Penelope, a home, a life, a purpose, and now a child? I could not ask for anything more. The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope struggled with sickness in the early months, and the summer heat made her miserable. But Quincy was attentive without being overbearing, taking over the heavier work while still letting her maintain her independence. He rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings and brought her cold water from the well, and he talked to her belly about horses and the prairie and how lucky this baby was to have Penelope as a mother. In late January of 1876, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the next day, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Benjamin Crawford, after Quincy's father. And when the midwife placed the tiny, squalling infant in Penelope's arms, she understood for the first time what people meant when they talked about perfect love. Quincy cried when he held his son, tears streaming down his weathered face as he examined tiny fingers and toes. "He is perfect," Quincy whispered. "You are perfect. God, Penelope, I love you so much." "I love you too," Penelope said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "Both of you?" The first months of parenthood were chaos. Endless nights of crying and feeding and trying to figure out how to care for a helpless human being while still managing the business. But they navigated it together, taking turns with night feedings, supporting each other through the exhaustion and frustration, and overwhelming the love. Benjamin was a fussy baby, colicky and difficult to soothe. But Quincy had a gift for calming him. Would walk the floor for hours singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until the baby finally settled. Watching her husband with their son, Penelope fell in love with Quincy all over again, deeper and more permanently than she would have thought possible. By the time Benjamin was 6 months old, their horse business was thriving. They had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the daily work, freeing up time for Penelope and Quincy to focus on training and medical care. Their reputation had spread across Kansas and into neighboring states, and they were turning away clients, unable to keep up with demand. "We should expand," Quincy said one evening as they sat on the porch watching Benjamin play with a wooden horse Quincy had carved. "Build a bigger barn, hire more help, maybe purchase some breeding stock of our own." "That would take significant capital," Penelope pointed out. "I know, but I think we could manage it. Our savings are healthy, and the bank might extend us credit based on our reputation." Penelope considered it carefully. Growth meant risk, but it also meant opportunity. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "Of course, this is your business as much as mine. We make decisions together." That night, after Benjamin was asleep and they were lying in bed, Penelope said, "Let us do it. Let us expand, but carefully, with a solid plan." Quincy kissed her, long and sweet. "Have I mentioned lately that I married the smartest woman in Kansas?" "Not since this morning." "Well, I am mentioning it now." The expansion took 2 years of careful planning and hard work. They built a larger barn with proper stalls and a covered training arena. They purchased 6 mares and a quality stallion, starting their own breeding program. They hired a young man named Thomas to help with breaking and a local widow named Margaret to help Penelope with medical care and foaling. Through it all, Benjamin grew from a fussy infant into a curious toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. He was walking by 10 months and riding his first pony before his 2nd birthday, fearless in a way that terrified and delighted Penelope in equal measure. In the summer of 1878, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in March of 1879, she delivered a daughter they named Catherine. Unlike her brother, Catherine was a calm baby, content to watch the world with solemn dark eyes that reminded Quincy of Penelope's father in the one photograph Penelope still treasured. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, the days full and exhausting but deeply satisfying. Quincy and Penelope worked side by side, raising their children and their horses, building a legacy that would outlast them. They argued sometimes, 2 strong-willed people navigating the challenges of partnership, but they always came back together, their foundation of love and respect strong enough to weather any storm. When Benjamin was 6 and Catherine 3, Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep. She left her freight business to her eldest son, but she left a substantial sum of money to Penelope with a note that said simply, for the woman who saved my mare and showed me what true dedication looks like." Penelope cried when she read the note, mourning the woman who had given her a chance when no one else would. They used the inheritance to purchase an adjacent 40 acres, doubling the size of their ranch and allowing them to expand their breeding program even further. By 1882, the Crawford Ranch was one of the most respected horse operations in Kansas. They supplied quality horses to the army, to ranchers, to anyone who valued good horse flesh and fair dealing. Penelope had become known as the best horse doctor in 3 counties, and Quincy's reputation as a breaker had spread across the West. But despite their success, they never forgot where they started. Every year on the anniversary of the night they met, they would go out to the old stable yard behind what had been Mrs. Henderson's freight office, now a dress shop run by her daughter. They would stand where Penelope had knelt beside the injured mare, where Quincy had offered to take the next watch, and they would remember. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not been looking out that window that night?" Quincy asked during one of these anniversary visits. "Every day," Penelope admitted. "I wonder how different my life would be without you." "Probably quieter," she laughed. "Definitely quieter, but emptier too, so much emptier." Quincy pulled her close, his arms solid around her waist. "I was looking for work when I came to Ellsworth. Just work, just a way to make money and keep moving. But I found you instead, and everything changed." "We found each other," Penelope corrected, as she always did. 2 lost people who stopped being lost. In 1885, when Benjamin was 9 and Catherine 6, Penelope gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Michael and James. The pregnancy had been difficult and the birth even more so, leaving Penelope weak and the doctor warning that she should not have more children. But the twins were healthy and robust, and Quincy hired additional help so Penelope could recover properly. 4 children, Penelope said one night, watching Quincy rock the twins while Benjamin read to Catherine by the fire. "Our little house is bursting at the seams." "Then we will build a bigger house," Quincy said simply. "Whatever you need, whatever our family needs, we will make it happen." They built a proper ranch house over the next year. 6 bedrooms with a wide porch and a kitchen big enough for their growing family. Penelope planted a garden, and Quincy built a swing that hung from the old oak tree in the yard. They filled the house with love and laughter, with the sounds of children playing and horses neighing and life being fully lived. As the children grew, they each found their place on the ranch. Benjamin proved to have his father's gift with horses, able to calm even the wildest Mustang with patience and intuition. Catherine inherited her mother's healing touch and her scientific mind, studying every veterinary book they could get her and assisting Penelope from a young age. The twins were still finding their way, but they showed promise in different areas. Michael, with a head for business, and James with a talent for building and repair. Penelope and Quincy watched their children flourish with pride and amazement. They had built something real and lasting, not just in terms of the ranch and the business, but in terms of family and legacy. Their children would carry forward the values they had worked so hard to instill, the importance of hard work and integrity and treating all creatures with respect. In 1892, Benjamin married a schoolteacher named Sarah, a smart young woman with a kind heart who fit seamlessly into the Crawford family. The wedding was held at the ranch with half the county in attendance, and Penelope cried watching her eldest son pledge his life to someone he loved as much as Quincy loved her. "Our boy is a man now," Quincy said that night, holding Penelope as they watched the party continue without them. "He learned from the best man I know," Penelope replied. "We did something right," Quincy said with satisfaction. "All 4 of them, we did something right." In 1895, Catherine announced that she wanted to attend veterinary college in Chicago. It was a bold dream for a woman in the 1890s, but Penelope and Quincy supported her without hesitation. They had raised their daughter to believe she could do anything she set her mind to, and they were not about to undermine that now. "Are you sure?" Penelope asked, holding Catherine's hands. "It will be hard being a woman in that field. People will doubt you, will try to discourage you." "I know," Catherine said with confidence, "but you did it, Mama. You became one of the best horse doctors in Kansas despite everyone saying women could not do that work. If you could do it, so can I." Penelope hugged her daughter, blinking back tears of pride. "You are going to change the world, my girl." "I am going to try." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The twins followed Benjamin into the horse business, while Catherine earned her degree and returned to Kansas to set up a veterinary practice in Ellsworth. She became the first female licensed veterinarian in the state, and her waiting room was always full of clients who valued her skill over outdated prejudices. Quincy and Penelope gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, content to let their children take over while they enjoyed a slower pace. They spent their mornings riding together across the prairie, visiting the horses they had bred, checking on foals born to mares they had delivered years before. "Do you remember that night?" Penelope asked one morning as they paused their horses near the creek. "The night we met, with the injured mare?" "I remember every detail," Quincy said. "The way you looked up at me, exhausted but defiant, protecting that animal with everything you had. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, though I did not realize it at the time." "I was terrified of you," Penelope admitted. "A stranger in the dark, and I was so vulnerable. But you were so gentle, so genuinely concerned about the mare. I wanted to trust you, even though everything I had learned told me not to. I am glad you took the chance. So am I. Every single day, I am glad." In 1903, Benjamin and Sarah gave them their first grandchild, a baby girl named Penelope after her grandmother. Holding the tiny infant, feeling the weight of new life in her arms, Penelope felt the circle of her own life completing itself. She had been given a second chance at family, at love, at building something beautiful out of the wreckage of loss. And now she was watching her children do the same. "She is perfect," Penelope whispered, tracing the baby's tiny features. Quincy stood beside her, his arm around her waist, his face creased with emotion, just like her grandmother. "We have been blessed," Penelope said softly, "so incredibly blessed." By 1908, Quincy was 62 and Penelope 56. Their hair had gone gray, their bodies marked by decades of hard work. But their love remained as strong as the day Quincy had offered to take the next watch. They sat together every evening on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the prairie, counting their blessings. They had 5 grandchildren now, with another on the way. The ranch was thriving under Benjamin's management, employing a dozen workers and supplying horses across the West. Catherine's veterinary practice had expanded to include a young partner, ensuring her work would continue long after she retired. The twins had married sisters and built houses on the ranch property, keeping the family close. "What do you think?" Quincy asked one evening as they watched their grandchildren play in the yard. "Did we do all right?" Penelope looked at the scene before them, at the children squealing with laughter, at the barn where horses nickered contentedly, at the land they had worked and loved and built a life upon. She thought about the frightened young woman she had been kneeling in the dirt beside a dying mare, alone and exhausted, and so very afraid. And she thought about the stranger who had emerged from the darkness offering help, asking nothing in return, beginning a journey neither of them could have imagined. "We did more than all right," Penelope said, taking Quincy's weathered hand in hers. "We did something extraordinary. We built a life worth living, raised children who will make the world better, loved each other through everything. I would not change a single moment." "Not even the hard times?" "Especially not the hard times. They made us stronger, taught us what we were capable of, and we faced all of it together." Quincy lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown that first night. "I love you, Penelope Crawford. From that night beside the mare until my last breath, I will love you. And I love you, Quincy Crawford. You saw me when I was invisible, helped me when I was struggling, loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. The prairie stretched out before them, endless and beautiful. And somewhere in the darkness, a horse whinnied softly, a sound as familiar and beloved as breathing. In the years that followed, Quincy and Penelope watched their family continue to grow and flourish. They celebrated weddings and births, mourned losses, supported their children and grandchildren through the challenges of life. They never stopped working entirely, always finding some way to contribute, to share the knowledge they had spent a lifetime accumulating. When Quincy fell ill in the winter of 1912, Penelope sat beside his bed with the same dedication she had shown the injured Mare so many years before. She held his hand through the fever, spoke to him in soothing tones, refused to leave his side, and when he recovered, weak but alive, he told her she had saved him just as surely as they had saved that mare. "We save each other," Penelope said simply. "That is what love is. Taking turns keeping watch, making sure the other is never alone in the darkness." They lived to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary in October of 1915, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends who had become family. The celebration was held at the ranch, with tables laden with food and music playing late into the night. Quincy and Penelope danced together under the stars, moving slowly but surely, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as they had 40 years before. 40 years, Quincy marveled. "Feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I know what you mean. Sometimes I look at you and see the young cowboy who offered to take the next watch. Other times I see everything we have lived through, everything we have built together." "Do you have any regrets?" Penelope considered the question seriously, as she considered everything. "No," she said finally, "not about us, not about this life. I am grateful for every moment, even the difficult ones. They all led us here. To this moment, and every moment yet to come." They continued to dance, two people who had chosen each other over and over again through decades of joy and sorrow, success and struggle. Around them, their family celebrated, their legacy made flesh, proof that love could build something lasting even in the harsh reality of the wild Kansas prairie. Quincy passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1918 at the age of 72. He died as he had lived, with dignity and grace, his hand clasped in Penelope's. She sat with him through that final night, keeping watch one last time, whispering her love and gratitude until his breathing stilled and he was gone. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. But Penelope was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, holding her up when she could not stand on her own, reminding her that Quincy's love lived on in all of them. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath an oak tree he had planted when they first purchased the land. The entire county came to the funeral, paying respects to a man who had lived honorably and loved well. Catherine spoke during the service, her voice strong despite her tears. "My father taught me that strength is not about being the biggest or the loudest," Catherine said. "It is about being steady, being reliable, being there when you are needed. He showed me what real love looks like, the kind that serves rather than demands, that lifts up rather than controls. And he showed me that partnership, real partnership, is possible between equals. My mother and father built something beautiful together, and their legacy will live on in all of us." After the service, Penelope stood alone at the grave, saying her private goodbye. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for loving me, for choosing me. Thank you for 43 years of partnership and love. Thank you for our children, our grandchildren, this life we built. I will love you until I take my last breath, and then I will find you again. Wait for me, my darling. I will not be long." Penelope lived for 5 more years after Quincy's death, remaining active in the ranch operations and enjoying her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She published a book about horse medicine that became a standard text in veterinary schools, ensuring that her knowledge would be passed down to future generations. And she spent many evenings sitting on the porch, talking to Quincy as if he were still beside her, keeping him updated on family news and ranch business. On a warm October evening in 1923, Penelope asked Benjamin to drive her to the old stable yard in Ellsworth where she had met Quincy all those years ago. The freight office was long gone, replaced by a hardware store, but the stable yard was still there, largely unchanged. Penelope stood in the spot where she had knelt beside the injured mare, where Quincy had emerged from the darkness to offer help. She closed her eyes and could almost feel him beside her, could almost hear his voice saying, "I will take the next watch." "I kept my promise," she said softly. "I loved you until my last breath. Now it is time for you to keep yours. Time for you to take the next watch." Benjamin, standing respectfully nearby, saw his mother smile with a peace he had not seen since his father's death. He helped her back to the car, drove her home to the ranch, settled her in her favorite chair on the porch. Penelope passed away that night quietly and without pain, still sitting in her chair with a smile on her face. She died as she had lived, with grace and courage, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Her children found her in the morning, and though they grieved, they also celebrated, knowing she was finally reunited with the man who had been her partner in all things. They buried her beside Quincy under the oak tree, her headstone reading simply, "Penelope Lawson Crawford, 1852-1923, beloved wife, mother, and healer. She never stopped keeping watch." The Crawford Ranch continued to operate for generations, run by descendants who grew up hearing the story of how it all began. The story of an injured mare, a lamp burning in the darkness, and a cowboy who offered to take the next watch. The story became family legend, told and retold, a reminder that love could begin in the most unexpected moments and grow into something that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. And somewhere in the Kansas prairie, under an oak tree on a hill, two people who had found each other against all odds rested side by side, their love story complete but never forgotten, their legacy living on in every horse that ran free, and every child who learned that real partnership, real love, was worth fighting for. The injured mare who had brought them together lived to the remarkable age of 28, producing 15 foals that carried her bloodline across the West. The Crawford family kept records of all her descendants, honoring the animal that had changed everything. And every year, on the anniversary of that fateful night, the family would gather at the old stable site in Ellsworth, would light a lantern and set it burning in the darkness, remembering Penelope's vigil and Quincy's offer, and the love story that had begun with those simple words, "I will take the next watch." Because that was what love was, they would tell their children. It was taking turns keeping watch, making sure your partner was never alone in the darkness, building something together that would outlast you both. It was seeing someone at their most vulnerable and choosing to help rather than exploit. It was trusting someone with your heart even when everything in your past told you not to trust. Penelope and Quincy had understood that from the very beginning, from that first night when exhaustion and desperation met kindness and reliability. They had built their entire life on that foundation, and it had held strong through everything the world threw at them. Their great-great-grandchildren would grow up in a very different world than the wild Kansas prairie of the 1870s, but the lessons of that love story remained relevant. Be kind. Be reliable. See people when they are struggling and offer help without expectation of return. Build partnerships based on respect and equality. Choose love over and over again, even when it is hard. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Penelope and Quincy continued their partnership, continued their love story, taking turns keeping watch through eternity. Two souls who had found each other and refused to let go, proving that the best love stories are not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but about showing up, staying present, and saying those simple, powerful words, "I will take the next watch."